de presidente, te vengo a saludar. Tu presencia está viva, de la montaña al mar, eterna en la memoria de Chile que sufrió por la rastrera infamia de un general traidor.
So I lived for a time in LA for most of my life. For a time I actually lived in Buena Park, in Orange County. And we have certain ideas about Orange County that aren't actually really true. I mean, we think Orange County is like one big monolithic, you know, kind of Orange County thing, but there's a lot of poor people in Orange County, and that's where I lived. So this poem's about that. In the first days of adulthood, still young from my ears, dirt beneath my fingernails, but behind the ears, I, like so much of the youth of SoCal, did my time in service of mouse. I worked parking. Often the first nearly human voice our guests would hear. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Mickey and Friends tram. Your courtesy ride. It's the happiest place on earth. It was in youth. It was in those first days of adulthood I lived in Orange County, far removed from the brochure images you are used to. Buena Park, Franklin and Western. Balcony of my apartment, cigarette hanging from my lip, cheap alcohol swinging from my breath, the cops harassing a 15-year-old kid, demanding the location of her still younger brother, a 13-year-old menace to society. I remember watching a young boy shadowboxing in the shallow end of the county's economy, in the shadow barrio, in this dirty brown secret to be kept within county lines, his raging fists, the power in his still full lungs would never echo past a Spanish whisper. I remember, our friends and I, we were the backs nearly broken, from shouldering the weight of phony smiles pinned upon us like name badges to conceal the dirt beneath our fingernails. I remember watching them, selling the tickets, directing the traffic, selling the gifts, cleaning the shit and piss, all service with a smile, all playing catch-up with insurmountable student debt for jobs that would not exist upon graduation. We, just a paycheck away from poverty, crammed 2 to 3 to an apartment, 6 or 7 to a rented home. I remember how we'd slack off when we thought the bosses weren't watching, cracking jokes, sneaking smokes, and considering ourselves free. We, the young and the damned, we wailed, we laughed, we cried, we drank those streets dry, airing out the dirty laundry of a glamorous cartoon parody encaged in slums where they locked us up to keep the dirt beneath our fingernails from bleeding into their satin sheets. So Orange County is an illusion that exists only in someone's mind. They put a bullet in Manuel Diaz's back, cuffed him, they put one in his head for the high crime of running while brown in the barrio he grew up in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a small world, to a magic kingdom where tourism flourishes, poverty vanishes, and your every wish is our command, where image is everything, life is cheap, so they gun down dirty Mexicans to keep their streets clean, an army of pigs holding up the sainted image of our rats. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Neverland. Never mind the riots and rebellions, never mind the crying mothers, the attack dogs or funeral processions, never mind the nightly raids where daily injustices don't, never mind all that, never mind the wails, the cries, the pleas, the blood flowing through the street, never mind the fact they put a bullet in Manuel Diaz's back, cuffed him, then put one in his head. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Mickey and Friends tram, your courtesy ride to the happiest place on earth. Just be careful while stepping over our dead. And this is the last poem of the book. I actually had a chance to talk to his mother. That was actually a really strange experience. She's doing well. She's a strong woman. It was weird because, I never knew him, never met him. Just, wrote a poem, put some in the end. Really, it really reconnects you to these things that we write about aren't just like, ethereal things or this macro thing. It actually happens. It's a people. And they have mothers. All right. And this one's partly about my mother and my father and my life in LA and being homeless and all that stuff. Here we go. The history of our family was never taught to me. I climbed my family tree like Helen Keller. Deaf, dumb, and blind. Piecing together what it meant to be Mexican, what it meant to be American, in a broken home under joint custody in historically and still Mexican section of British Los Angeles. My father, raised by the bel buckle, raised by parents who would go months without speaking, raised me under the influence of the bottle. Under his raised fist, under his raised voice, he raised a stuttering and shell-shocked child, horrified. and contemptuous. My mother, raised with love, raised with encouragement, raised a second born, a first generation, born in a new country, a beautiful and curious woman, raised me with a library card. Raised a boy genius, and had to raise his hand, had to raise his voice, and raise questions in the historically and still Mexican section at Greater East Los Angeles. I learned how to love. And I learned how to hate. In the same place, at the same time. By 5, play chess, roll the punches, identify the instruments in the orchestra, and fall asleep to the sounds of gunshots. Pretend they were fireworks. To the sounds of my father's scream, pretended it was a television under the cover of blankets in the deepest, darkest, loneliest stretch of the night by flashlight. I learned how to read, or pretend to be asleep to avoid life. By 5, I memorized the names and terms of all the presidents. Became something of an obsession when I grew something to someone, just not sure who. By 8, thinking he'd be proud of me, I told my father I could see myself in that Oval Office before he sat me down and said, "Son, we are Mexican, and this is America. That's never going to happen." The history of my family was never taught to me. I climbed that family tree bitter and thorny. Heard stories my great-grandfather died sick. Off the Colorado Blackland, he got slaving away in the coal mines of America. Read a book about something called the Mexican Repatriation Act, and I began to piece together, brought him here, and when sent him back, the story of my grandfather and my grandmother was made that much clearer, and I began to understand that our entire family had been deported from this country in the 1930s for no reason other than their last name and the color of their skin, and I began to piece together, I may never be born at that, never happiness. I have spent the better part of my life understanding that oppression runs through my veins, and that is not a history that goes down easy. So the boy genius who would be president now began to hate this country and all that it stood for, and all that it trampled over, the racism that our mother's father drove to its borders, the poverty and the misery to my father's father to become an alcoholic, that bitter legacy that never goes down easy to my father and I to become alcoholics. Yes, I hated all of it. It's mindless consumption, it's mindless labor, the pointless moving a box from one corner of the room to another, the misery of living paycheck to paycheck as a mindless slave to next month's rent in a heartless economy that drove me towards homelessness. I slept in my car, under the stars, under a flag, under Old Glory flying so arrogantly over me. I hated the stares of coworkers who knew I had not seen a bed in weeks. The whispers you could hear had never known what it was to shower in a gas station sink, and I hated the hatred that tore me from my father, the pride that kept me from my mother. When I lost that job, I shot through my days aimlessly, beaten down by the summer heat like a stray dog, wandering the summer streets, and I remember my mother reading a Shakespeare, and all that I was supposed to be. Some kind of genius, some kind of prodigy, now homeless, and I hated this country and all that it stood for. A government supposedly formed by the people that never had anything to offer you but debt. With jobs that robbed my time and energy of all meaning and value, and took and took and took until there was nothing left in this cruel joke of a meritocracy which now seemed poised, guiltless, and indifferent to lead me to my death. Yes, I hated all of it. But nowhere near as much as I hated myself. And I found myself drunk and debased, barely able to stand, barely still a man in a walking, talking coma, sleepwalking through a childhood sanctuary. I found myself drunk at the library, applying for a card. But I came back the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and I read, and I read, and I read, and I began to see the true history of this country. The real nature of its economy was never taught to me. And never been a question of peoples or borders or New World Order. It wasn't the white man. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't any personal affair. There was no global conspiracy, no Illuminati. The very nature of the global economy, the very nature of private property. And I read, and I read, and I read. I read Marx, I read Engels, I read Lenin. I began to agree with them. I saw for the first time that I wasn't alone, that it wasn't my fault, that I was a worker, that I was working class, that I was proletariat, and so very proud of it. A boy genius who dreamed of becoming president but grew into a man much more likely to write his local congressman, demand his resignation, unless he can provide a country worth living in, one free of racism, one free of exploitation and oppression of women when free from the social Darwinism that makes beasts of us all. Free, 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 thank God Almighty, free to throw capitalism into the dustbin of history, the history of my family. The meaning of my life, the truth about the world and my place within it was never taught to me. Because there's some things you have to learn for yourself. Thank you guys.
Allende, presidente, te vengo a saludar. Tu presencia está viva, de la montaña al mar, eterna en la memoria.